The piercing, sterile smell of the hospital, the rhythmic, urgent beep of a heart monitor. For most, this is the soundtrack to a miracle. But for Vivian, it was the soundtrack to the most profound betrayal of her life. As a wave of agony seized her body, the only hand she had to squeeze was her own. The leather chair beside her, the one her husband Damien was supposed to be in, sat cold and empty. Her calls went to voicemail, each unanswered ring a fresh stab to her heart. She was about to bring their son into the world, but she had never felt more alone. Where was her millionaire husband? He was miles away, toasting champagne with his mistress, oblivious to the fact that his wife's world and the empire he'd built were about to come crashing down. The pain was a living thing. It coiled in Vivian Rossi's abdomen, a white-hot serpent of pressure and fire, before radiating through her entire being. She gasped, her knuckles turning white, as she gripped the cold metal bedrail of the delivery suite at St. Jude's Medical Center. The room, painted in a sterile, calming blue, felt like a Cries. The heart monitor beeped a frantic rhythm, a counterpoint to the slow, agonizing tick of the clock on the wall. 8:14 p.m. "You're doing great, Vivian. Just breathe with me now." A kind-faced nurse named Mary said, her voice a soothing balm on Vivian's frayed nerves. Deep breath in and out slowly. Vivian tried, but the breath hitched in her throat, turning into a sob. It wasn't just the physical pain that was tearing her apart. It was the vast, echoing emptiness of the room. It was the sight of the plush leather visitor's chair, the one Damien had insisted they bring from his office for maximum comfort, sitting vacant. He was supposed to be here. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the sterile reality and summon his face. Not the recent version of Damien Sterling, the one whose eyes were always glued to his phone, whose smiles didn't quite reach them, whose excuses about late-night board meetings and emergency client dinners had become a nightly occurrence. No, she tried to remember the Damien she had fallen in love with 5 years ago, the charismatic real estate magnate who had swept her off her feet, an up-and-coming architect with more dreams than money. He had seen her sketches for a community center and declared her a genius. He had pursued her with a relentless, intoxicating passion that made her feel like the only woman in the world. "We're a team, Izzy," he'd whispered to her on their wedding night, their penthouse apartment overlooking the glittering city lights. "Sterling and Rossi. We'll build an empire, and then we'll build a family to fill it." Now their empire felt like his prison, and she was just a forgotten inmate. Her phone lay on the bedside table, a dark, silent rectangle. She had tried calling him a dozen times since her water broke that afternoon. The first few calls rang endlessly before clicking over to his polished, professional voicemail. "You've reached Damien Sterling. I'm currently unavailable." The last 8 had gone straight to that same damned message. His phone was off. Or he was ignoring her. The latter felt like a shard of glass, twisting in her gut. "Any luck reaching your husband, honey?" Mary asked gently, adjusting the fetal monitor strap on Vivian's belly. Vivian shook her head, a single hot tear escaping her eye and tracing a path through the sweat on her temple. He had a crucial deal closing in San Francisco. A last-minute flight. He promised he'd be on the first plane back. He swore he wouldn't miss it. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. She was defending him out of habit, but the defense felt hollow even to her own ears. Another contraction hit more powerful than the last. Vivian cried out a raw, primal sound that was part pain, part despair. In that moment of blinding agony, She wasn't Mrs. Vivian Sterling, wife of a millionaire resident of a glass-walled palace in the sky. She was just a woman, terrified and utterly alone, about to face the biggest moment of her life, with nothing but the professional kindness of strangers. Hours bled into one another. The world outside the hermetically sealed room ceased to exist. There was only the relentless cycle of pain, the rhythmic beeping, and the gaping void left by Damien's absence. Through the haze of exhaustion and agony memories flickered Damien assembling the crib. His brow furrowed in concentration, Damien pressing his ear to her swollen belly, a rare, genuine smile on his face as the baby kicked. He's got a right hook like his old man, he'd joked. Where was that man now? At 2:47 a.m., after a final desperate push that felt like it was tearing her soul from her body, her son was born. A cascade of relief, love, and utter exhaustion washed over her as the doctor placed the wailing, beautiful baby on her chest. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a thatch of dark hair, just like Damien's. She sobbed this time, with a joy so fierce it hurt. "Leo," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Leo, Michael Sterling." As the nurses cleaned her up and settled her and Leo into the recovery room, a sliver of hope remained. Maybe Damien's plane was delayed. Maybe his phone had died. Maybe he would burst through the door any second, breathless and apologetic, his eyes lighting up at the sight of his son. The door finally opened at 6:15 a.m. Damien stood there, his custom-tailored suit looking impossibly crisp, not a hair out of place. He smelled faintly of expensive cologne and something else, something floral and distinctly feminine. There was no look of frantic worry on his face, no disheveled panic from a mad dash through the airport. He looked merely inconvenienced. "Izzy," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I am so sorry. The deal went into extra innings. We were at the negotiating table all night. My phone died. I came as soon as I could." Vivian stared at him, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She looked at his perfectly knotted silk tie, his polished shoes, and the faint, almost invisible smudge of shimmery pink lipstick on the collar of his white shirt. She looked at the man who had missed the birth of his own son for a deal. She held Leo closer, turning her face away so he wouldn't see the fresh tears. The deal, she repeated, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Right. I'm glad you could close it, Damien." He moved closer, peering at the baby in her arms with a detached curiosity. "So that's him, huh? He's small." Vivian didn't answer. She just looked down at the tiny, perfect face of her son, a silent vow forming in her heart. She had brought him into this world alone, and if she had to, she would raise him alone too. The cold, empty chair from the delivery room was no longer just a piece of furniture. It was a symbol. It was the beginning of the end. The first few weeks home were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the overwhelming primal love Vivian felt for Leo. Their penthouse apartment, which had once felt like a symbol of their success, now felt like a gilded cage. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but all Vivian could see was her own reflection, a tired, pale woman in a milk-stained robe, her architectural ambitions gathering dust, along with Damien's untouched family photo albums. Damien played the part of the doting new father, but only when an audience was present. For his parents' visit, he held Leo with practiced ease, boasting about his strong grip. When his business partner, Nathan Chen, came over with a gift, Damien spoke of legacy and building an empire for his heir. But when they were alone, the performance stopped. The nights were Vivian's domain. Damien slept in the guest room, citing the need to be sharp for morning meetings. His excuse was that Leo's crying would disrupt his concentration. The truth Vivian knew was a chasm widening between them so vast that a baby's cry couldn't possibly cross it. His phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter, was now his constant companion, always screen down or in his pocket. He took calls on the terrace, his voice a low, intimate murmur carried away by the wind. The late nights became more frequent, the excuses more elaborate. Networking dinners, investor calls with Dubai site inspections that ran late. Vivian, consumed by the demands of a newborn, tried to ignore the warning signs. She told herself it was the stress of his work, the pressure of his new multi-billion-dollar waterfront development project. She wanted to believe the man she married was still in there somewhere, buried beneath layers of ambition and arrogance. The first crack in her denial appeared on a Tuesday morning. Damien had left early for a breakfast meeting. Vivian was sorting laundry when his tablet, which was synced to his phone, chimed with a notification on the nightstand. She glanced over. It was a calendar alert. Anniversary dinner, S8 p.m. at Le Ciel. Vivian's blood ran cold. Their anniversary was in October. This was August. And who was Say? Her mind raced. Sarah Samantha. A cold dread pooled in her stomach. Le Ciel was the most exclusive romantic restaurant in the city, with a 6-month waiting list. He had told her he was having dinner with a concrete supplier from Chicago. Her hand trembled as she picked up the tablet. It was unlocked. With a heart hammering against her ribs, she opened his messages. She didn't have to scroll far. A conversation with a contact named simply S was pinned to the top. The profile picture was of a sleek black swan logo, not a person. The messages were a dagger to the heart. Can't wait for tonight, my love. 1 year since you walked into my gallery and changed my life. Damien. The feeling is mutual. Tonight we celebrate. Wear the red dress. S. The one you like, Damien. The one I like to take off you. S. Naughty. Don't be late. I have a surprise for you. Damien. I'll be there. I have to deal with something at home first. But my evening is all yours. Deal with something at home. The phrase echoed in the silent room. Was she the something? A chore to be managed before his real life began. Vivian sank onto the bed, the tablet slipping from her numb fingers. It wasn't a fling. It was a 1-year anniversary. He was living a completely separate life, celebrating milestones with another woman, while she was at home pregnant with his child waiting for him. The lipstick stain on his collar from the night Leo was born flashed in her mind. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. He hadn't been in San Francisco. He had been with her. He had chosen his mistress over the birth of his own son. Rage, cold and pure, surged through her, replacing the shock. She thought of calling him, of screaming down the phone, of shattering the pristine, minimalist decor of their perfect apartment. But what good would that do? He would deny it. He would gaslight her. Call her hormonal and crazy, twist her own words until she doubted her sanity. He was a master of control and manipulation. No. A screaming match was what he would expect. It was a fire he knew how to extinguish. She needed something else. She needed proof. She needed a plan. That evening, when Damien came home, he was carrying a small, elegant bouquet of white lilies. For you, he said, kissing her cheek. The gesture was so hollow it was insulting. "Sorry I'm late." The meeting ran over. Vivian forced a smile, her heart a block of ice. "They're beautiful, thank you. How was your dinner with the supplier?" "Productive," he said, loosening his tie. "Boring stuff. Concrete tariffs, logistics. You'd have been bored to tears." She watched him, marveling at the ease with which he lied. He was a perfect stranger, living in her home, sleeping in her guest room, fathering her child. The man she married was gone, replaced by this polished, empty shell. Later that night, after Damien had retreated to the guest room, Vivian crept into his home office. She had always respected his privacy, but privacy was a privilege for the trustworthy. She turned on his desktop computer. Password protected, of course. She tried their anniversary. No, his birthday. No, Leo's birthday. On a whim, she typed in the name of his first company, the one he'd started from nothing, Apex. Access granted. Her breath caught. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. She opened his browser history, her hands shaking. There were links to luxury jewelers' pages for Cartier and Tiffany's. Recent searches included private jet charter to Monaco and five-star resorts in Bali. Then she found what she was looking for, a link to an art gallery. Galerie Dubois. The logo was the same sleek black swan from the messaging app. She clicked on the About Us page, and there she was. The owner, Serafina Dubois. She was stunning in an angular, severe way, high cheekbones, raven black hair, cut in a sharp bob, intelligent, calculating eyes. She was everything Vivian wasn't. She was polished, powerful, and unencumbered by the beautiful, messy reality of motherhood. Vivian scrolled through the gallery's event photos, and then she saw it. A picture from a charity gala 2 months prior. Damien was on the far left of the photo, but his attention was entirely focused on the woman next to him, Serafina. He was laughing, his head tilted towards her, his hand resting on the small of her back with an intimacy that was unmistakable. They looked like a couple, a power couple. Vivian stared at the photo until the faces blurred through her tears. The glass house Damien had built for them was a sham. The foundations were rotten, and the cracks were finally starting to show. And Vivian knew with a terrifying certainty that she had to be the one to bring it all crashing down before it buried her and Leo alive. The next few days were an exercise in masterful acting for Vivian. She played the part of the devoted, if slightly overwhelmed, new mother. She smiled when Damien held Leo. She asked about his day. She feigned belief in his increasingly flimsy excuses for his absences. Inside, she was a coiled spring of fury and resolve. The grief was still there, a raw wound in her chest, but it was being cauterized by a burning need for truth and justice. Her first call was to her best friend, Chloe Martinez. They had been inseparable since college, and Chloe, now a razor-sharp litigator at a top family law firm, was the one person Vivian knew she could trust implicitly. "Chloe, I need you." Vivian said, her voice barely a whisper, as she rocked Leo's bassinet with her foot. "Not as a friend. I need you as a lawyer." An hour later, Chloe was sitting in Vivian's kitchen, a sleek leather briefcase on the table next to a half-empty baby bottle. Chloe's sharp, intelligent eyes scanned Vivian's face with concern. "Izzy, talk to me. What's going on? You look like you haven't slept in a year." With trembling hands, Vivian slid Damien's tablet across the marble countertop, open to the messages with S. Chloe read them, her expression shifting from concern to a cold, professional fury. She scrolled, her jaw tightening with every flirtatious exchange, every shared secret, every plan for a clandestine meeting. When she finally looked up, her voice was low and dangerous. The son of a bitch. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Vivian finally let the dam break. The whole story poured out of her: the empty chair in the delivery room, the lipstick stain, the fake business trips, the anniversary dinner, the Galerie du Bois. Chloe listened patiently, her expression hardening into a mask of legal steel. "Okay," she said, when Vivian finished, her voice firm. "Okay, Izzy. The first thing you need to understand is that you are not going to be a victim in this. We are going to be smart. We are going to be strategic. And we are going to be prepared. No screaming matches, no emotional confrontations. Not yet. Right now, we are on a fact-finding mission. We need irrefutable proof, not just of the affair, but of its scope and duration." Over the next week, guided by Chloe's strategic mind, Vivian transformed from a heartbroken wife into a private investigator in her own home. It was a dangerous, nerve-wracking game. She had to seize small windows of opportunity when Damien was in the shower or on a genuine business call. She started with finances. Chloe had advised her to look for unusual expenditures. Using the Apex password, she gained access to his personal credit card statements. It was all there, laid out in cold, hard numbers. Weekly charges at five-star hotels, always for a day rate. Thousands of dollars spent at Cartier last month, a diamond bracelet, the invoice revealed. Extravagant dinners at Le Ciel and other restaurants he'd claimed were for business, charged on nights he was supposedly working late. There were charges from a high-end lingerie boutique and regular payments to a luxury car service. The most damning discovery was a recurring monthly payment of $25,000 to a holding company she didn't recognize, Dubois Holdings, LLC. It was a direct financial link. He wasn't just wining and dining his mistress. He was funding her. The emotional betrayal was agonizing, but the financial evidence was solid gold. "This isn't just an affair," Izzy Chloe said, looking over the printouts Vivian had discreetly made. "This is a pattern of dissipation of marital assets. He's actively spending your shared wealth on this woman. This changes everything." The next step was to get visual confirmation. Chloe was adamant. A judge can explain away credit card bills. It's a lot harder to explain away a photograph. Chloe hired a private investigator, a discreet professional named Frank, a former police detective with a knack for blending into the background. Vivian provided Frank with Damien's schedule, which she pieced together from his calendar and overheard calls. The target was a business conference Damien was supposedly attending downtown for 2 days. The waiting was torturous. Vivian felt sick with anxiety every time her phone buzzed. She tried to focus on Leo, on his gummy smiles and tiny grasping fingers. He was her anchor, her reason for pushing through this nightmare. The email from Frank arrived on the second day. The subject line was simple: "File attached." Vivian's hand shook as she clicked it open. There were a dozen photographs. The first few showed Damien checking into the Four Seasons Hotel alone. But the next one showed Serafina Dubois arriving 20 minutes later, walking into the same hotel. Then came the money shot, a long lens photo taken from across the street, looking into the hotel's exclusive bar. Damien and Serafina were seated at a secluded table, heads close together. Damien was holding her hand across the table, his thumb stroking her knuckles. They weren't talking business. They were looking at each other with an intimacy that made Vivian's stomach churn. The final photo was of them waiting for an elevator. his arm wrapped possessively around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder. This was it. The irrefutable, soul-crushing proof. Her husband's double life unveiled in a series of high-resolution images. She saw a man she barely recognized, relaxed, happy, and completely enthralled by another woman. He had never looked at her that way, not even at the beginning. She closed the laptop, a cold, calm resolve settling over her. Chloe was right. This was no longer about a broken heart. This was about survival. This was about securing a future for Leo, a future that Damien was actively trying to give to someone else. That night, Damien came home feigning exhaustion from the conference. It was brutal, Izzy. Back-to-back seminars on zoning regulations. You wouldn't believe how dry it was, he said, kissing the top of her head. Vivian looked up at him, her eyes clear and steady. The actress in her delivered the performance of a lifetime. Poor baby. She cooed, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. Why don't you go take a long shower? I'll order your favorite takeout. You deserve to relax. As he walked away, Vivian looked at his back, the back of a man who was a complete stranger to her. The game had changed. She had the proof. Now she just had to wait for the right moment to play her hand. But she couldn't shake a terrifying thought. If he was capable of this level of deception, what else was he hiding? With the evidence of the affair, photographic, digital, and financial piling up, Vivian felt a grim sense of control returning. She and Chloe were building a formidable case. The plan was simple: confront Damien, file for divorce, and use the evidence of infidelity and dissipation of assets to secure a generous settlement that would ensure she and Leo were set for life. It was a painful but straightforward path, or so she thought. The twist came from an unexpected source: Damien's business partner, Nathan Chen. Nathan was a quiet, methodical man, the numbers genius behind the Sterling Holdings throne. He had always been polite, if distant, towards Vivian. One afternoon, he called her directly, his voice strained and urgent. Vivian, I know this is highly inappropriate, but I need to speak with you, alone. It's about Damien. It's important. They met at a small, anonymous coffee shop halfway across town. Nathan looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes. He fidgeted with his cup, avoiding her gaze. Nathan. What's wrong? Vivian asked, her heart beginning to pound. I'm breaking a lot of rules by being here. He began, his voice low. Damien would kill me, but I have a conscience, and I have a daughter. What he's doing, it's not just wrong, it's catastrophic. Vivian braced herself. You know about Serafina Dubois. Nathan nodded grimly. It's worse than you think. This isn't just some midlife crisis affair. Serafina isn't just an art dealer. Her father is Lucien Dubois, the head of a rival European conglomerate, Vexillium Group. They've been trying to get a foothold in the US market for years, and Damien has blocked them at every turn. Vivian felt a chill crawl up her spine. What are you saying? I'm saying this affair is strategic. At first, I think it was just ego for Damien conquering the daughter of his biggest rival. But it's morphed into something else. They're in business together. He slid a file folder across the table. Damien is about to close the biggest deal of his career, the North Harbor development. It's a $2 billion project. The city council gave him preliminary approval based on his financial disclosures. But his finances are a house of cards, Vivian. She opened the folder. It was filled with spreadsheets and bank statements that made her head spin. Nathan pointed to a series of transactions. Damien didn't have enough liquid capital to secure the final bond for the project. The banks were getting nervous. So he got creative. He's been systematically devaluing Sterling Holdings' assets on paper-transferring funds through a series of shell corporations. The final destination? He tapped a name on the page. Dubois Holdings, LLC. Vivian's breath hitched. The same company he was sending Serafina $25,000 a month. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Nathan continued, his voice barely a whisper. He's essentially funneling Sterling Holdings' money into her company. She then uses that money to invest back into the North Harbor project as a silent partner, making it look like Damien has secured legitimate foreign investment. It's a massive fraud. He's using your shared marital assets to illegally finance a project with his mistress, who is a front for his biggest competitor. Vivian stared at him, the coffee shop blurring around her. This was so much bigger, so much more sinister than infidelity. But why, she managed to ask. Why would he do that? Why would he involve her? Because he's planning to leave Nathan, said finally, meeting her eyes. The pity in them was like a physical blow. Once the North Harbor deal is finalized and the first phase of construction is paid for, the money will be tied up in the new entity co-owned by him and Serafina. He's planning to dissolve his majority stake in Sterling Holdings, declare it near bankrupt from all the asset transfers, and start a new company in Europe with Serafina and all the North Harbor money. He's not just leaving you. He's planning on leaving you with the smoldering ruins of his company and a mountain of debt. He's trying to leave you with absolutely nothing. The air left Vivian's lungs. It was a betrayal on a scale she could never have imagined. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was methodically erasing her from his life, financially and personally. He was stealing their past, their present, and her son's future. The penthouse, the cars, the savings, it was all a mirage. The money was already gone, siphoned away to build a new life with another woman. The beautiful architect who had fallen for a charismatic visionary now saw the truth. She hadn't married a builder. She had married a demolitions expert. And she and her son were standing at ground zero. She closed the folder, her hands steady. The shock was so profound, it had bypassed tears and gone straight to ice. The little game of catching a cheating husband was over. This was war. A war for her survival, for her son's birthright, and for every penny that this man was trying to steal from them. "Thank you, Nathan," she said, her voice eerily calm. "You have no idea what you've just done." He gave her a weak, sad smile. "Just be careful, Vivian. He's more ruthless than you can imagine. When a man is willing to burn down his own empire, he won't hesitate to destroy anyone standing in the ashes." Vivian walked out of the coffee shop into the bright afternoon sun. But everything looked dark. Damien wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a criminal. And he had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated the woman he was trying to destroy. The revelations from Nathan Chen shifted the ground beneath Vivian's feet. The personal betrayal, as deep and painful as it was now eclipsed by a clear and present danger. This was no longer a divorce strategy. It was a rescue mission. She met Chloe that same evening, spreading Nathan's documents across the dining room table. A table Damien had once proudly declared was carved from a single slab of Italian marble. Now it felt like a slab in a morgue, where they were performing an autopsy on her marriage and his company. Chloe's legal mind went into overdrive. Her eyes, sharp and focused, darted across the spreadsheets and bank statements. She let out a low whistle. "Oh, Damien," she murmured, "you are in so much more trouble than you know." She looked at Vivian, her expression a mixture of fury and admiration. "Most people would crumble, Izzy. You're building." "I'm an architect, Chloe." Vivian replied, her voice steely. "I know how to read a blueprint. And this is the blueprint of a crime. He thinks I'm at home, drowning in diapers and sorrow. He has no idea I'm about to become the biggest structural problem his new life has. The plan had to change. A simple divorce filing was no longer enough. If they filed now, Damien would accelerate his plans, move the rest of the money, and disappear, leaving them to fight over the scraps of a bankrupt company. "We need to be smarter," Chloe declared, pacing the length of the vast living room. "We can't just sue for divorce. We need to stop the North Harbor deal from closing. We need to freeze his assets before he can move another dime. We're moving beyond family law, Izzy. This is corporate fraud. We need a different kind of weapon." Chloe brought in a forensic accountant, a man named Mr. Davies, whose mild, bespectacled appearance belied a mind like a steel trap. For the next 2 weeks, Vivian's life became a clandestine operation. By day, she was the perfect, unassuming wife, playing her part with an Oscar-worthy performance. She'd pack Damien's briefcase for his important meetings, all the while knowing he was meeting with lawyers to finalize the fraudulent deal with Serafina. She'd smile and kiss him goodbye, the taste of betrayal bitter in her mouth, her mind racing with the details she and her team were uncovering. At night, after Damien had retired to his guest room, Sanctuary, Vivian's real work began. With Mr. Davies on a secure video call and Chloe in her kitchen, they dove into the digital labyrinth of Damien's empire. Using the information Nathan had provided as a key, they unlocked a hidden world of deception. They traced the money through shell corporations in the Cayman Islands and Panama, back to accounts controlled by Vexillium Group, and ultimately to Serafina Dubois. Mr. Davies discovered the smoking gun, a draft of the final North Harbor partnership agreement on Damien's cloud server, which he had foolishly synced to the family computer. It detailed the exact structure of the new European company he and Serafina were forming. It even laid out a contingency plan for the dissolution of Sterling Holdings and a proposed spousal settlement for Vivian that was a pittance, a calculated insult designed to leave her financially crippled. Reading the cold, legalistic words that planned her ruin was the final piece of her emotional armor clicking into place. The love she had felt for him curdled into something cold, hard, and pragmatic. He had made this a business transaction, and she was about to become the most ruthless negotiator he had ever faced. The most difficult part was the waiting. The final city council vote to approve the North Harbor project was scheduled in 1 week. That was Damien's finish line. Once that vote passed, the first massive payment from the city would be released, and the money would vanish into the black hole of his new European venture. "We have to move before the vote," Chloe insisted. "We'll file an emergency injunction, a temporary restraining order, freezing all personal and corporate assets of both Damien Sterling and Sterling Holdings, pending a fraud investigation. We'll attach every piece of evidence we have. The bank transfers the partnership agreement, Frank's photos, Nathan's testimony. We'll alert the district attorney's office and the SEC. We're not just going to divorce him, Izzy. We're going to detonate his entire world." The day before the vote, Vivian walked through the penthouse, a ghost in her own home. She looked at the nursery at Leo, sleeping peacefully in his crib, innocent of the storm that was about to break. A fierce, protective love washed over her. She was not just fighting for herself. She was fighting for him. That afternoon, Damien was in a jubilant mood. He came home early, a rare occurrence. He was practically vibrating with energy. "Big day tomorrow, Izzy," he said, pouring 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to her. A toast. To the future. Vivian took the glass, her hand steady. She looked him directly in the eye, a faint, cryptic smile on her lips. To the future, she echoed, her voice smooth as silk. "May everyone get exactly what they deserve." He clinked his glass against hers, oblivious. He didn't see the iron resolve in her eyes. He didn't see the architect of his downfall standing before him. He just saw his quiet, docile wife, the something at home he had to manage. He had no idea that the foundations of his empire were already gone, and that she was the one holding the detonator. The countdown had begun. The morning of the city council vote dawned bright and clear. For Damien Sterling, it was supposed to be the single greatest day of his professional life. The culmination of years of planning, scheming, and ruthless ambition. The North Harbor project would cement his legacy as a titan of industry. He left the penthouse in a cloud of expensive cologne and smug satisfaction, giving Vivian a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. "Wish me luck," he said. "Not that I'll need it. Today is a formality." "I'm sure it is," Vivian replied, her voice unnervingly calm. She held Leo in her arms, her shield and her inspiration. "I have a few formalities of my own to attend to today." He barely heard her, already on his phone, barking orders at an underling. The moment the front door closed, Vivian's team sprang into action. Chloe was already at the courthouse, filing the emergency injunction. Mr. Davies was on a secure line with the SEC Enforcement Division, walking them through the fraudulent asset transfers. Frank, the private investigator, was delivering a package of evidence to the district attorney's white-collar crime unit. And Nathan Chen was waiting in a conference room, with his lawyer ready to give his official statement as a whistleblower. Vivian's role was the final, most crucial piece of the puzzle. It was a move Chloe had called dramatically effective. At 10:00 a.m., the city council meeting was called to order. The chamber was packed with journalists, city officials, and investors. Damien Sterling sat at the front table, the picture of confidence flanked by his lawyers. Serafina Dubois was seated in the second row, a vision in a blood-red power suit, her expression cool and triumphant. They exchanged a subtle, victorious glance. The council chairman began the proceedings. "We are here today for the final vote on the North Harbor Development Project, presented by Sterling Holdings." Just as he was about to continue, the main doors of the chamber swung open. A uniformed court process server walked briskly down the aisle. He stopped directly in front of the presenter's table. "Damien Sterling," he asked, his voice booming in the suddenly silent room. Damien looked up, his confident smile faltering into a look of pure confusion. "Yes." The server placed a thick stack of documents directly in front of him. "You've been served." Cameras flashed. A confused murmur rippled through the chamber. Damien stared at the papers, his face draining of color. The top sheet was a temporary restraining order signed by a judge just 30 minutes prior. In bold letters, it stated that all assets, personal and corporate, of Damien Sterling and Sterling Holdings were hereby frozen. His head snapped up, his eyes frantically scanning the room. And then he saw her. Vivian was standing in the doorway she had just entered. She was not the tired postpartum wife in a messy bun and sweats. She was the architect. She was dressed in a sleek charcoal grey suit, her hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. She held Leo on her hip not as a burden, but as a symbol of what she was fighting for. Her expression was not one of tears or anger. It was one of absolute, chilling calm. Their eyes locked across the crowded room. In that single, silent moment, Damien understood everything. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a business rival. This was his wife. The woman he had dismissed, deceived, and discarded. Panic raw and undisguised flashed across his face. He looked over at Serafina. Her mask of cool composure had shattered. She was staring at Vivian with a look of stunned disbelief, then at the legal documents on Damien's table with dawning horror. Her investment, her new life, was turning to smoke before her very eyes. The council chairman, utterly bewildered, banged his gavel. Order. What is the meaning of this Chloe Martinez looking every bit the legal powerhouse? She was stepped forward from the side of the room. Mr. Chairman, members of the council, she announced, her voice ringing with authority. My name is Chloe Martinez. I represent Mrs. Vivian Sterling. The documents served to Mr. Sterling detail a massive ongoing financial fraud scheme directly related to the financing of the North Harbour project. We have provided evidence to the SEC and the District Attorney's Office that Sterling Holdings is functionally insolvent and that its assets have been illegally funneled into shell corporations. We respectfully request that this vote be postponed indefinitely, pending a full criminal investigation. The room erupted. Reporters scrambled, shouting questions. Damien's lawyers were on their feet objecting uselessly. Damien himself was frozen, his face a mask of utter ruin. He looked from the legal papers to Serafina and back to Vivian. Serafina, ever the pragmatist, saw the ship was sinking. She rose silently from her seat, and with one last venomous glare at Damien, she turned and slipped out a side door, abandoning him without a second thought. His last lifeline was gone. Vivian held his gaze for a moment longer. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence said it all. You thought I was part of the foundation of your new life, her eyes seemed to say. But you forgot. I'm the one who knows how to bring buildings down. With a quiet dignity, she turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving behind the wreckage of her husband's life. The sound of the chairman's gavel banging for order was the closing punctuation on her old life and the starting gun for her new one. The detonation was complete. Now it was time to rebuild from the ashes. 1 year later, the air tasted different. It no longer carried the metallic, sterile tang of the city, a scent Vivian had come to associate with high-altitude ambition and low-level deceit. Instead, it was filled with the briny, life-affirming fragrance of the sea. The constant, distant roar of traffic had been replaced by the rhythmic sigh of waves against sand and the cheerful cry of gulls overhead. Everything, it seemed, was breathing again. The months immediately following the chaotic city council meeting had been a maelstrom. The name Damien Sterling became a permanent fixture in the headlines, a spectacular cautionary tale of corporate hubris. Vivian had watched from a distance as the legal system, a slow but powerful grinding machine, dismantled her husband's empire and his life. She attended the necessary court proceedings, a silent, dignified presence in the back of the room, listening as lawyers and prosecutors laid bare the intricate web of lies he had spun. Seeing Damien in the defendant's box was a surreal experience. The bespoke suits were gone, replaced by ill-fitting courtroom attire. The confident swagger had evaporated, leaving behind a shrunken, hollowed-out man whose eyes were a mixture of disbelief and pathetic self-pity. He had tried to reach out to her through his lawyers, sending messages, pleading for a letter of support for a statement about his good character. Vivian had instructed Chloe to return them all unopened. His character had been revealed not in a courtroom, but in an empty chair in a delivery room. The final sentencing was a day of quiet finality. 10 years in a federal prison. As the judge's gavel fell, a collective gasp went through the courtroom. Vivian felt nothing. Not triumph, not pity, not even the bitter satisfaction of revenge. It was simply the closing of a book, the final logical consequence of a story he had authored himself. She walked out of the courthouse, shielding her face from the flashbulbs of the press, her only thought on getting home to her son. Serafina Dubois had vanished as if she were a mirage. Interpol had issued a notice, but her family's wealth and influence had spirited her away, likely to a non-extradition country where she could live out her days in luxurious exile. Vivian rarely thought of her. Serafina wasn't the cause of the rot. She was merely a symptom of it. The disease had been in Damien's soul all along. With the legal battles concluded, Vivian executed her own blueprint for escape. The court, guided by Chloe's fierce and meticulous advocacy, had untangled the mess of Damien's finances. After the government and creditors took their share, what was left of the untainted marital assets was awarded to Vivian. It was not the fortune of a millionaire's wife, but it was more than enough. It was freedom. It was a fresh start. She sold the penthouse and everything in it, refusing to take a single piece of furniture, a single piece of art from that cold, glass-walled mausoleum. She packed only her clothes, Leo's belongings, and a long-forgotten cardboard tube that had been stored in the back of a closet. She moved back to Seaside, the quiet coastal town where she had grown up, a place of weathered, cedar-shingled houses and lifelong friendships. She bought a modest but charming craftsman-style house on a street lined with old oak trees. It had a wide front porch for sipping coffee, a small, sun-drenched room that she immediately claimed as her studio, and a sprawling, slightly wild backyard perfect for a little boy to explore. After the sterile silence of the penthouse, this house was alive. It creaked and groaned in the wind, its rooms filled with the scent of her mother, Maria's cooking, and the sound of Leo's delighted squeals. It was a home. For the first few months, she did nothing but heal. She walked for miles on the beach. Leo strapped to her chest, the salty wind whipping the tears from her eyes, tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed during the fight. She was not mourning the man Damien had become, but the man she had once believed he was. She was grieving the future she had envisioned, the family she had thought she was building. One rainy Tuesday, while Leo was napping, she finally opened the cardboard tube she had saved. She unrolled the contents on her new drafting table. They were her old architectural drawings from before she met Damien. Designs for a sustainable community center, a free clinic, a series of beautiful, affordable family homes. Her dreams rendered in graphite and ink. Her fingers traced the lines, a spark of electricity running up her arm. It felt like coming home to herself. That spark ignited a fire. She started small, establishing a one-woman firm from her sunroom studio. She named it simply Rossi Designs, reclaiming the name that was truly hers. Her first client was her elderly next-door neighbor, who wanted a new deck and a wheelchair-accessible ramp. Vivian poured her heart into the project, creating a design that was not only functional but beautiful, with built-in planters and a pergola for climbing roses. The joy and gratitude on her neighbor's face was more satisfying than any praise Damien had ever given her. Word of her thoughtful, human-centric designs spread through the small town. A commission for a kitchen remodel led to a full house renovation, which led to a contract to design a new wing for the local library. She was not building monuments to ego. She was creating spaces for life. Which brought her to this crisp autumn afternoon. The sun, low and golden, cast long shadows across the bustling construction site. Vivian stood, a white, hard hat perched on her head, a blueprint clutched in her hand, watching as the framework for the new seaside community center rose against the twilight sky. It was her design, the very one she had packed away in that cardboard tube all those years ago, now revised and improved, coming to life in wood and teal. Leo now, a sturdy, curious toddler with his father's dark hair. But her warm, steady eyes was digging happily in a large sandbox nearby. Her mother, Maria, sat on a bench, her knitting needles clicking softly, a serene smile on her face. This was her world now. Not a penthouse overlooking a city of strangers, but an open field surrounded by family building something for her community. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting a call from the contractor. Instead, it was a text from an unfamiliar number. Vivian, it's Nathan Chen. I saw in the trade journal that Rossi Designs won the Regional Architecture Award for the Seaside Community Center. Just wanted to say congratulations. No one deserves it more. You built something beautiful out of the rubble. Vivian stared at the message, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. Nathan, the unlikely catalyst, the man whose conscience had given her the weapons she needed to fight back. She typed a simple reply. Thank you, Nathan. That means a lot. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and looked up. She saw the clean, strong lines of the building taking shape her building. She looked at her son, laughing as he piled sand into a bright red bucket. Her son. Damien had been a builder of towers made of glass and lies on foundations of greed. They were designed to impress, to intimidate, to dominate. But a flawed foundation means the whole structure is compromised, destined to collapse. She, on the other hand, was an architect. She knew that the most important part of any structure was its foundation. Her new life was built on a foundation of integrity, resilience, and a mother's unbreakable love. It was a structure designed not for show, but for shelter. Not for ambition, but for authenticity. It was the most important project she had ever undertaken, and its blueprint was finally beautifully complete. Vivian's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals don't have to be the end of our story. They can be the catalyst for discovering a strength we never knew we had. She walked through fire not to be consumed by it, but to be forged by it. She transformed from a victim of a rich man's greed into the architect of her own destiny, building a life of purpose and love on the ruins of his lies. Her victory wasn't just in the courtroom. It was in every sunrise she watched with her son, in every blueprint she drew, and in every moment she chose peace over bitterness. What did you think of Vivian's journey? Could you have been as strong and strategic as she was? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will inspire and move you. Thank you for listening.